Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Pereira. The Maldives foreign minister will visit Beijing before the end of 2018, officials said on Wednesday, likely seeking to renegotiate the archipelago's Chinese debt. China has loaned billions of dollars to countries around the Indian Ocean and beyond for infrastructure development, stoking fears of a debt trap. The new Maldives government of President Mohamed Solih has called for a review of Chinese-bankrolled projects initiated under predecessor Abdullah Yameen. Former President Mohamed Nasheed, now Solih's mentor, has accused China of a land grab in the strategically placed Indian Ocean archipelago and called a free trade agreement agreed with Beijing under Yameen one-sided. China, on the other hand, said that it hoped the Maldives will think before scrapping the free trade agreement. Meanwhile, the Maldives and India appear to have struck all the right chords for a much-needed reset of the bilateral relationship as the new government headed by President Solih assumed office in Malé recently. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the changing equations in the Maldives. Joining me on the program today are Professor S.D. Muni, Foreign Affairs expert, K.P. Nair, Strategic Analyst, Sriram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and we are also joined by Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, retired defense expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor Muni, I'd like to start the program with you. When the elections were concluded in the Maldives way back in September and the president-elect had to take over only in November, there were a different set of fears then, whether or not the outgoing president would allow the incoming president to take office smoothly, would the transition take place smoothly or not, and several other challenges. Now that that has happened, there are a new set of challenges as far as the Maldives is concerned, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, there is no doubt what you said, that the foreign policy dimension may be changing. But I have a feeling even internally, we must carefully watch as to what happens in Maldives. And why I am saying so, particularly from India's point of view, is that you would recall we were very excited when the change took place in Sri Lanka. And there also it was a kind of similar coalition to remove one dictatorial regime. Everybody else joined hands. Once the dictatorial regime was removed, everybody who had joined hands forgot the promises they made. And they actually started disputing more on the share in power and all that. And I don't rule out that possibility in Maldives as well. Therefore, we must be very careful as to how cohesive in terms of policies and changes which this government functions. This is absolutely important. Same time, in similar issues, like even China issue was very much there. The question of development was very much there. And what kind of relationship we should have with India. The Sri Lankans tried to change it, could not. And don't forget that the Chinese have already said to Maldives that you cannot radically change the free trade agreement, which they have openly said that they are going to change in one way or the other. Secondly, I think even yesterday they have said that the debt, which some of the commentators have said constitutes 70% of the Chinese, of the Maldives burden, is actually not 70%, it is only 50%. And that of the total amount of, I think, 1.3 or 2 billion dollars. So this kind of a dispute will keep coming in. So I think while we are very happy with what has happened, and I must compliment the Prime Minister because he has taken time off to go and greet him right there, which must be very moral boosting for Maldives. But we should be very carefully watching as to how these relations unfold. And secondly, we should not be expecting too heavy things out of Maldives, because it is better to go slow and cautious.
All right, be cautious going forward is what you're suggesting. Admiral, let me bring you into the picture now. As far as Maldives is concerned, what are the biggest challenges really as far as India is concerned going forward when we look at the Maldives?
I think the biggest challenge we have is that, first of all, we must compliment the armed forces of Maldives because, they apparently did not support the continuation of President Yameen. You mentioned about there was some doubt about, President Yameen not leaving power. And Professor Muni has just mentioned that we should go very cautiously. So I think the point is that if the outgoing president did not have the support of the Chief of Defence Staff, then the Chief of Defence Staff has done well because he's protected the Constitution. So I think that our endeavor should be that we are already training them for a long time, and the training must make them good keepers of the Constitution rather than getting sort of politically biased. That is one. Yesterday, the new Defence Minister of Maldives, who's a lady, she has made a statement of very similar nature that we will request India to train our armed forces in a manner that they protect the Constitution. So I'm very happy that this has happened. Having said that, the Chinese have actually got a lot of projects going. They had suggested or they had requested to build 13 or develop 13 airports in Maldives, mostly in the southern islands, which we had objected. And there were 1 or 2 islands in the northern part also. And I must mention here that the nearest island, Muni Island, is only 90 nautical miles from the northernmost island in the chain of Maldives. So if the airports had been given at that time, if India had not complained, positively it would have become a big security risk to India. So that is one. The second risk is these ISIS. There are a very large number of the density-wise, the large number of young youth who have gone and joined the ISIS,
right,
given the very small population. And if there is a radicalism, if it is not checked, as I said, 90 nautical miles is not much. We can have a fallout, and the fast patrol boats can just take 4 hours to Muni from the northernmost island. So we have to have a security concern is much more than what meets the eye.
All right, right. Yeah, Mr. Nair, is that a concern then that the Maldives could be headed the Sri Lanka way? We've seen what has happened with Hambantota. We tried really hard. The Sri Lankan government also, after the elections in 2015, took a very pro-India stand. But at the end of the day, they could not keep the Chinese at bay.
It is my view that we make too much of the Chinese presence, you see. There are many reasons for that. First of all, I mean, it's only natural that China will get involved in countries all over the world, and countries would want China to get involved because the Chinese economy is not what it was, say, 2 decades ago. So, I mean, China is an economic power, and countries all over the world, developing countries, want Chinese money, want Chinese investment. They look forward to China doing something to boost their economy and jobs. Just as 50 years ago, after the end of colonialism, many of the African countries looked at Britain, and the Francophone countries looked at France, and everybody looked at the United States when it became the biggest economy, and Japan, for example. So, I mean, I don't quite understand what this fuss is about China in economic terms, because China is a big economy, and the earlier we recognize, when I say we, I don't mean the government, generally people who deal with these issues in public fora recognize that the Chinese preeminent role in economic affairs, the better. Anyway, then there is this talk about the debt trap. The debt trap also, as Professor Muni pointed out, much was made of it. Actually, it's only 50% China, what Maldives owe the Chinese. What about the remaining 50%? What nobody mentions, nobody even knows where the remaining 50% is. In any case, we all know that International Monetary Fund at one time put many countries not only in debt trap, they really destroyed the economies, especially in Africa, especially if countries like Tanzania, if they depended on, if they were going a little socialist way, public ownership and all that, IMF made sure that the economy was destroyed. So what the Chinese are allegedly doing in terms of the so-called debt trap, it is nothing compared to the damage that International Monetary Fund has done worldwide, the kind of damage, and over decades, you see. So in my view, we have to have a certain amount of balance in looking at what Maldives will do. But the Indian government is making the right moves. You know, Prime Minister's decision to go there was the right step. And and the government is actually moving in a graduated manner. There is no panic, unlike in the media and in the think tank community. So I think as far as India-Maldives relations are concerned, I think that we are taking the right path.
And they're on the right trajectory.
Yes, but the public discourse I'm not happy about, because there's so much of exaggeration and the tendency to create a kind of panic.
Right. So we are making too much as far as China is concerned, is what you're suggesting, and this, you know, this cautious and slow approach that we have at the moment is good, and that's the way to go forward, is what a couple of panelists have suggested. Yes, Professor Muni, you wanted to add something?
No, I only wanted to react on China. I can come later.
Okay, great. Professor Solih, you know, let's look at another aspect that has taken place of late. Of course, the Maldives deciding to be a part of the Commonwealth. Now, what do you make of that?
Well, Frank, I think I just want to rejoin to the China element as well first. You know, the question is not whether we want Washington consensus or Beijing consensus. I think both are equally neo-colonial. And the question is, what kind of autonomous choices can small and weak countries have to be able to hold their own and to be able to hold their own governments accountable for the kind of shadowy foreign policies they are enacting. And the Chinese are expert at it in terms of buying elites, in terms of bribing elites, and in terms of overtaking the physical infrastructure as well as the policy space of many countries through blatant bribery. So this is, if this is not neocolonialism, then what is it? And so I think for the people of Maldives, one of the reasons Ibrahim Solih won the election and why we have a revival of democracy there is because it was a rejection of this China-dependent model. So let's not downplay the nefarious intent of superpowers when it comes to their unequal dealings with small and weak countries. Second thing on the the broader issue, I think you see you mentioned the Commonwealth and attempts to. I see this moment 2018 as a kind of a second coming of a democratic transition, which had been stalled, and it's very important. Prime Minister kept on mentioning when he was there the word democracy. And it's very important for us to emphasize that rule of law, democracy. And on the other hand, President Solih was repeatedly saying that there were lots of these dubious decisions taken for infrastructure, for loans, on trade, on major projects, which actually did not benefit the people of the Maldives, and therefore there has been a pushback against it. So as a sovereign will of the people of that country is saying, we don't want the China model, and it has not solved any of our problems. Just to give one example, the housing situation. Now, the Chinese companies have been building all these luxury condos and apartment buildings in the last few years under the previous regime. And they did not actually ease any of the space constraints that people are facing in Malé, Hulu Malé. Most of the urban centers where there's dense concentration of people, they are living in tiny little cramped apartments, and they needed space. And the Chinese could not solve it. But in turn, they have this model of what we call debt to equity swaps. And that is, I think, a very insidious and a vicious means by which they are able to capture real estate, capture public policy, and capture elites. And I think there is a pushback coming from below, and that is good. And if it is also geopolitically beneficial for India, there's no reason why we should not encourage this pushback. Right. So I think there's a reason why we are worried about China and worried about also, I'm not an advocate for Washington consensus either. Let the Bretton Woods institutions as well as the Beijing consensus, both of them meet the reality, which is people's desire to live with equity and with justice and to have their own autonomous choices. I think that's a central question. If India can play a role in getting the people of Maldives or Sri Lanka or any other country in our region to be able to have autonomy of choice, I think we would have succeeded.
Yes, Professor. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, just talking about China, and the Chinese model. We've seen more and more countries, speaking up and talking about how the Chinese model really is not working for them, be it Malaysia, be it Pakistan. The CPEC has run into trouble. Some of the African nations too are talking about it. So even if the Maldives wants to keep China out, even if the new establishment is working hard to keep the Chinese out, will it be able to do that?
No, it would not be easy. And when I come to this, I respect KP's opinion very highly, but I must beg to differ on it. Firstly, that, look at the whole structure. The Maldivians are saying that the debt is 70% on China. The Chinese are saying that the debt is 50% on China. Now, who do you believe it? Now, I don't believe the Chinese, largely because the Chinese they have not shown any transparency in any of their BRI agreements which they have done with other countries. So we don't know how actually they are calculating this. I think the Maldivians are the recipients and they must be knowing about it in one way or the other. I agree with Sriram again that there is no point comparing that if the IMF and others have exploited these poorer countries, the Chinese have equal rights to exploit that. That's not should be the case there. And thirdly, the problem is not with economics, as KP said in a great deal. The problem is of adding strategic projects to the infrastructure economic project. That is what Admiral Sinha was hinting at it. This is what it happened in Hambantota. This is what it happened in Gwadar. Now, therefore, if you are having a strategic eye and camouflaging it with your economic projects, then you are not being honest about it. Now, this is where India's worries lie. And whatever the Chinese do something, they can do anything anywhere else. But if it is going to hurt India's interest, either in the immediate future or in the long run, I think India must raise objections to that.
Right. All right. Admiral, talking about the strategic aspect of Maldives, or what strategic importance really is Maldives, not just to us, but to the world as well, and how important is it to have an independent and an autonomous Maldives?
Let me tell you what Professor Muni said. Just let me expand on that a little bit. The width of the Indian Ocean, roughly at the closest point, is about 1,500 nautical miles, 3,000 kilometers roughly. If any ships, let's take for example the Chinese ships who are into this maritime Silk Route and they are transiting through the Indian Ocean, and as China has very clearly indicated that wherever their interests are, trade interests, the security will be ensured before the trade starts. And therefore, you got a port in Djibouti, and shortly you will find it will happen in Gwadar. So Malé gives an intermediary mediate port where the ships, the warships, even merchant ships can be turned around, given a little bit of break, fueled up, etc. And it gives you a staging ground. And if you have more warships and the submarines of China or any other country actually parked in such a close vicinity, and I mentioned it's only 90 nautical miles from Indian territory, then it has got a strategic implication. It can become a security problem. What I see out of this is if Malé and Hambantota, if they don't permit the Chinese naval ships to berth and fuel, then the activity in Gwadar is going to increase. It will soon become more of Chinese naval base, so that the naval ships are plying up and down and protecting the maritime Silk Route ships, and that is bound to happen. Anyone which is going to Gulf. So I think that the India's maneuvering space, the strategic space in your own backyard, it is going to become much smaller, and mainly to do with the width and the distances which the ships have to travel from the Straits of Malacca to the Straits of Hormuz or the Gulf of Aden. So it's right in the middle, and therefore for Maldives to be very independent and be concerned about the security issues of India is important.
Right.
Okay, you don't have to be very pro-India, but certainly don't become pro-China or pro-Pakistan, who are, known adversaries. And as Professor Muni rightly said, they camouflage this strategic issues under the cover of, the economic cooperation, etc. I would like to know that when you swap land for the debt which you can't repay, isn't this some kind of colonization?
Right.
And if you make a base there, naval base or army base, won't it impact India's own security?
Sure, right.
Entire southern peninsula will come under, the issue will come under surveillance of those radars. And therefore, you have a problem because China, Pakistan have got a known nexus. All the information will be given.
Sure.
We have a problem.
Let me take the points that you're making to the other panelists as well. Firstly, Mr. Nair, I think it's only fair to let you respond to what the others have said about your comments. Saying that Maldives is of strategic importance and it should be taken forward in that way.
Maldives is definitely of strategic importance. But to everybody, you see, I mean, you earlier mentioned Commonwealth. Maldives rejoining the Commonwealth. I mean, Commonwealth can be a vehicle for other countries to do the same thing that China is doing, for example. You see, I mean, if Maldives joins the Commonwealth, who is going to benefit most through the Commonwealth route? First of all, Great Britain. Then Canada. Canada with its propensity to give massive aid and promote human rights and all that. It's an entry for Canada. What about Australia? Australia is always looking for expanding its naval presence in the region. So if it is of strategic importance to China, it's also of strategic importance to countries like Britain, Australia and Canada. And what about the United States? No? I mean, United States has been, now we forget. I mean, we unfortunately forget history quite often. United States has been eyeing this region from the 70s. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, even objected to Voice of America, VOA setting up a listening post in Sri Lanka in the 1970s, you see. I mean, United States, don't you think United States will not be interested in the region? In any case, they have Diego Garcia. But from time to time, question marks are raised about Diego Garcia. They would love to have something in Maldives. I'm not saying there are any plans, but nobody talks about the United States at all, you see. My point is that, yes, we have to be concerned. We need to protect our interests, but our interests are protected not by running down another country. You see, our interests are protected by taking active steps to protect our interests. In any case, it is my view that instead of overemphasizing the strategic aspects, we should try to promote people-to-people cooperation. I mean, these are people at our doorstep, you see. And unfortunately, the previous government in Maldives, under the previous government, to a very large extent, what has happened is the downgrading of the people-to-people relationship.
Right.
You see, like there is a, now earlier, Maldivians used to come to India, my home state, Kerala, in droves for medical treatment. And my recollection is that they used to be given $300 by the Maldivian government for medical treatment in Kerala. Now the rules were changed. There is a hospital there, and only if that hospital certifies that this treatment is not available in Malé, can you go to India and get this $300?
Right.
But that hospital is not, I mean, most of the things there, I'm told, are not working, MRI machines and other sophisticated equipment. But the hospital doesn't give the certificate, you see. We need to reactivate these sort of things, whereas so that Maldivians can come to India. Promoting people-to-people relationship is much more important than worrying about, of course, we have to keep an eye on armed presence and all that. But this is where our priorities should lie.
Absolutely right. Yeah, Professor Cholia, let's look at Maldives now holistically. Maldives is not just about Maldives, India and China. There are other players, there are others who have been interested in the Maldives as well. How are the others going to be looking at the situation in the Maldives right now?
Well, Frank, for one, I see the Commonwealth as more like a normative player right now. It doesn't have any kind of it's not the vehicle of one big power any longer. So I don't fear. In fact, Britain, France, Canada, none of these really have any power projection capabilities in Indian Ocean region anymore. So these are like, the strategic environment of the 1960s or 70s is not comparable to today. Today, the biggest, the one on the prowl is China and, of course, the United States. These are the two big players, and they will be key. So I think for Maldives to join the Commonwealth is a strategic move by Solih and the civil society in Maldives, because they know that they need support for long-term democratization. And the Commonwealth actually has, principles to excommunicate and expel members if they are transgressing the democratic norm. And they have done so for Pakistan many times. For example, whenever they had military coups. So I think it's helpful to bring about this transition. As to other actors, I think we do need to partner with others. For example, we have the Asia-Africa growth corridor idea with Japan. We have, our own hopes for creating the Sagarmala, the Prime Minister Modi's vision, expanding. By the way, Prime Minister was supposed to visit Maldives 2015, and the other two countries that are part of this, triangle or quadrangle is Mauritius and Seychelles, where we are providing naval and other kinds of surveillance support to those countries. Madagascar is only just a little further away to the east coast of Africa. So we need to think about these island countries, just as we have now a institutionalized strategy for the Pacific Island nations on the eastern side, eastern end of the Indian Ocean. We need a similar one for these four, including the Maldives. And Maldives was not conducive as long as the old regime was in place. But now we should look at how we can enhance their monitoring and surveillance, and also to be able to hold its own economically. Because one is the debt, the other is, it's not able to export much. Just for information, 360 billion is what the Chinese exported to the Maldives, and less than $500 million is what the Maldives was able to export to China under this free trade agreement. So the so-called fisheries boom that the previous regime was promising was not coming from China. So we need to be able to buy more Maldivian products. We need to have Indian business over there in a bigger way, and we need to connect with the other pieces of the puzzle, which is Mauritius, Seychelles, and Madagascar. And then we have a kind of an island chain of prosperity and security for India's future.
Absolutely. All right. Quick closing comments from all my guests. I've got only 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to ask you to be brief, starting with you first, Professor Muni.
Well, one is that we should take also Saudi Arabia into account, because as Admiral Sinha mentioned about radicalization. Secondly, yes, I mean, the Chinese are interested, so others may be interested. But we objected to US being in Sri Lanka. And there is no reason why should we welcome the Chinese strategic footprints in Maldives in one way or the other. But lastly, I think your last question, that it would not be easy to push the Chinese back. The Chinese are putting in money. They are putting in money everywhere else. They have deep interests. And therefore, to negotiate with the Chinese for Maldives is going to be an uphill task.
Absolutely.
And we must take that into account.
Right. Admiral.
As long as we are able to strengthen the democratic institutions in Maldives, I think the things will fall in place. At the same time, as Professor mentioned that, we should take Maldives into fold, I want to mention that Maldives, as far as surveillance is concerned, we already have our radars there. Unfortunately, they had been stopped operating in the previous regime. And Mauritius and Seychelles, we already have an agreement. So that would happen. And the entire maritime domain awareness of the Indian government or Indian Navy, it is going to be much wider. It is true that it was not happening because of the Maldives, because the relay stations, the distance was becoming too much.
But things will change now, is what you're suggesting. Yes, Mr. Nair.
Well, the Prime Minister's visit to Maldives, it was the only South Asian country he hadn't visited, is a good beginning. It opens a new path to our relations with the Maldives. We shouldn't be complacent, but we shouldn't get overexcited either. Look back a decade ago when the Asian tsunami happened. Who rushed there first? It was our naval ships which provided relief, not only Maldives and Sri Lanka, but even in Indonesia, you see. So we have our strengths, and we should rely on our strength. And
focus on our strengths.
Have confidence in ourselves in dealing with Maldives.
Professor Solih, close the show for us with the concluding remarks.
Frank, Maldives is the lowest country of the world in terms of sea level. And it faces a massive environmental crisis, one of the small island nations that is threatened. India has sustainable development models that is superior to the Chinese high energy consuming and carbon emitting footprint. And we should emphasize social housing, sustainable development. These are the two things on which we have the strengths to build the capacity of the country along with their educational system. That is going to be the winner in the long run and will secure the wishes of the people of Maldives, which is reflected in this new transition that's happening.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback and suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.